This is Gail Weathers with an exclusive.
Authorities are baffled.
Been warned by the killer.
It all began with a scream over 911, like the plot of some scary movie.
Hello, Sidney. Do you like scary movies?
Before this became a horror movie inspiration, it was just a college town at the end of summer. Gainesville, Florida. August 1990. Students are coming back for the fall semester. Parents are unloading cars. Apartment doors are propped open while people carry boxes inside. Somebody is trying to figure out where the nearest grocery store is. Somebody else is making plans for the weekend before classes get serious. Nothing about that scene feels like history. It feels normal. And that is why what happened next hit so hard. Because the fear did not begin with a mask. It did not begin with a phone call. It began with apartments. Ordinary apartments. The kind with sliding doors or couches, bedrooms upstairs, laundry baskets on the floor, and students trying to begin their lives. Then, over roughly 72 hours, 5 students were murdered. And after that, Gainesville stopped feeling like Gainesville. Students fled. Parents called in panic. People slept in groups. Some kept baseball bats by their beds. The University of Florida had to answer letters from parents asking if their kids should even come back. Years later, a young screenwriter named Kevin Williamson would be alone in a house, watching coverage connected to these murders. He would notice an open window. And in that moment, the house around him would change. That fear became the seed of scream. So no, Ghostface was not real, but the fear that helped create him was. The first apartment belonged to 2 young students, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. Sonia was 18, Christina was 17. They were roommates at Williamsburg Village Apartments, just south of the University of Florida campus. Try to picture the ordinary version of that night first. Not the crime, the life around it. A college apartment at the beginning of a semester. Someone asleep downstairs, someone else upstairs. The quiet that settles in after a long day when a place finally stops sounding busy. According to the Florida Supreme Court record in Rolling v. State, in the early morning hours of August 24th, Danny Rolling entered their apartment armed and prepared. The record says he came in through the rear of the apartment. Inside, Christina Powell was asleep downstairs on the couch. Rolling saw her. But he did not wake her. He moved past her and went upstairs. That one detail is terrifying without adding anything to it, because it means this was not chaos from the first second. There was a moment where the apartment was still quiet, a moment where one roommate was asleep downstairs, a moment where the danger moved deeper into the apartment before anyone fully understood it was there. Upstairs, Sonia Larson was asleep in her bedroom. The court record says Rolling attacked her there. It says she fought to defend herself and that he used duct tape to keep her quiet. We do not need to turn the rest into spectacle. The important thing is this. The first attack happened in the exact place where a person should be most protected. A bedroom. A bed. A closed-in private space. Then Rolling went back downstairs. Christina Powell was still there. The court record is explicit about what he did to her there. We're not going to read it aloud, but she did not survive it. Again, we are not going to linger on the graphic details, but we cannot skip what matters either. 2 students were killed inside their apartment, and after Rolling left, the apartment did not look like the beginning of a school year anymore. It became the first scene in a pattern that no one in Gainesville understood yet. The public did not experience the crime in the order Rolling did. They experienced it the way communities experience horror after the fact, through discovery, sirens, phone calls, and rumors. At first, people knew something terrible had happened at Williamsburg Village. 2 students were dead. But a double murder, as shocking as it was, did not yet tell everyone what Gainesville was becoming. Maybe it was isolated. Maybe it was personal. Maybe police would have an answer quickly. That is how people try to calm themselves when the first impossible thing happens. They make the story smaller. They tell themselves it has a boundary. 1 apartment, 1 incident, One answer coming soon. But the problem was that the story was not finished. And while investigators were trying to understand the first scene, the person responsible had not disappeared from Gainesville. He was still there. That is what makes the next part so unsettling. Because the town did not know it yet. But the first apartment was not the end of the nightmare. It was the beginning. The next victim was Krista Hoyt. She was 18 years old, a Santa Fe Community College student, and she worked nights as a records clerk for the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. WUFT later reported that she wanted to become a criminal investigator, or crime scene investigator. That detail is heartbreaking, because in another version of her life, Krista might have spent her future helping solve scenes like the one she became part of. According to the court record, about 42 hours after the first attack, Rowling broke into Krista Hoyt's apartment. But she was not home, so he waited. That is the part that changes the feeling of the story, because this is not just someone forcing his way into a space and leaving. This is someone entering an empty apartment and turning it into a trap. Picture the normal version of coming home. You open the door, you step inside. You expect the room to be empty because you left it empty. You expect your things to be where they were. You expect the silence to belong to you. But in Krista's apartment, according to the record, Rowling was already inside when she returned. The court says she came home later that morning and was attacked. And when she was found, the case changed. For law enforcement, this was personal. Krista had worked in the sheriff's office. WUFT later reported Spencer Mann, the sheriff's spokesman at the time, saying that when her body was found, it was not only upsetting because of the scope of the murder, it was personal to deputies and support staff. Mann said the visualizations of the crime scene stayed with him for years. He said it was surreal. He said deputies had bad dreams. That is not sensationalism. That is the people tasked with protecting a community realizing the danger had reached into their own building, their own coworkers, their own circle. And now the fear had a new shape. It was not only, could someone break in while you sleep? It was also, could someone already be inside when you come home? That question is pure Scream. Before Scream existed, not because the movie copied the facts, it did not. But because the emotional engine is the same. The house is familiar. The room is familiar. Then suddenly, it belongs to the threat. By this point, Gainesville was no longer processing one tragedy. It was bracing for the possibility of another. WUFT's 4 Days, 5 Murders describes what happened to the town in plain, frightening terms. Students fled. Residents hunkered down. People huddled together in crowds or slept with baseball bats by their pillows. That is the kind of detail you cannot fake because it tells you the exact level of fear people were living with. Not vague fear. Practical fear. Where do I sleep tonight? Who do I stay with? Can I walk to my car? Should I leave town? Should my daughter come home? At the University of Florida, the fear showed up in letters. WUFT later reported that UF's archive contains a box from that period labeled Tragedies. Inside were communications sent to and from President John Lombardi during the murders. One letter, signed by concerned parents, asked him to close the university. How can students study when they are living in fear of their life? That line tells the story better than any explanation could. Because that is not a critic looking back at a horror movie, that is a parent in real time trying to decide if a university town has become too dangerous for their child. UF increased security. Officials distributed handheld alarms and whistles. A phone bank was set up so students could make free long-distance calls home. Think about that. A phone bank. Because this was 1990. No smartphones. No emergency alerts in everyone's pocket. No group text where students could instantly check on each other. A frightened student who needed to call home needed access to a phone. And if you were a parent waiting for that call, every minute probably felt longer than it should. That is how fear moved through Gainesville, not as one big cinematic wave, as hundreds of small decisions. Lock the door. Sleep somewhere else. Call home. Keep a bat nearby. Leave town if you can. Then came the final apartment, Manuel Manny Taboada and Tracy Pauls. Tracy was 23. She was returning to the University of Florida and wanted to become a lawyer. WUFT later told a story from Tracy's sister, Lori Leahy, that feels almost impossible to hear in hindsight. Before Tracy left for Gainesville, Lori called her and said she had a feeling Tracy was going to go to Gainesville, and she would not see her again. Tracy tried to calm her down. She told her to stop, that she was freaking her out, that she was going to be fine. And then Tracy left for Gainesville. That is the kind of moment that becomes unbearable only later. At the time, it is just a worried sister saying something emotional. Afterward, it becomes the last warning nobody could use. According to the Florida Supreme Court record, around 3 a.m. on August 27th, Rolling entered the apartment Tracy shared with Manny Taboada. The court says he attacked Manny first, and there was a struggle. Tracy heard the commotion. She ran to her room and tried to lock the door. That is the scene, not the graphic details. That moment, a person hearing something terrible in the apartment, understanding enough to run, getting to a bedroom, trying to make a door into a barrier, trying to turn a lock into safety. But according to the record, Rolling broke in. Manny and Tracy became the final two victims, and after that, Gainesville knew. 5 students, 3 apartments, roughly 72 hours. This was not a rumor anymore, not a single tragedy, not one address. The fear had moved across the map, and nobody knew where it would stop. Once the pattern was clear, Gainesville stopped belonging to the people who lived there. Spencer Mann later told WUFT that hundreds of media outlets descended on the town, reporters from across the country and even overseas. Think about what that does to a place already afraid to be home. Now the cameras are outside, too. The same students sleeping with bats by their beds or stepping over news vans to get to class. And fear, when it has no answer to point to, starts looking for a face. During the investigation, a student named Edward Humphrey became publicly tied to suspicion around the case. WUFT later made it clear he was never charged, and he did not commit these murders. But for a while, in the pressure of the moment, his name and his face became part of the story anyway. That's the quiet second invasion of Gainesville. First, a stranger got inside the apartments, and then the whole country got inside the town. The danger had a shape now. The grief didn't, and both were playing out on the same screen. The answer did not arrive in time to stop the fear from changing Gainesville. Danny Rolling was arrested in September 1990 on an unrelated robbery charge. Investigators later connected him to the Gainesville murders through evidence discussed in the case history, including tools and physical evidence. On February 15, 1994, the day his trial was set to begin, Rolling changed his plea to guilty. The Florida Supreme Court record says he pled guilty to the murders of Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Manuel Taboada, and Tracy Pauls, along with related charges. The jury recommended death for each murder by a vote of 12-0. The trial court imposed 5 death sentences. In 1997, the Florida Supreme Court affirmed them. That gave the case a legal ending, but not an emotional one. Because a sentence does not erase what it felt like to live through those days, it does not erase the students who left. It does not erase the parents who wrote letters. It does not erase the deputies who had bad dreams. It does not erase the memorial wall in Gainesville where the names are still remembered. And it does not erase the specific kind of fear this case left behind. The fear that a normal home can stop being safe without warning. Now we can finally get to Scream. Years later, Kevin Williamson was alone watching coverage connected to the Gainesville murders. Different accounts tell the moment with slight variations, but the core is the same. He was thinking about the case, he noticed an open window, and suddenly the house around him felt different. That is the part I think people misunderstand when they say Scream was based on a true story. Because the movie is not a recreation of Gainesville. There is no real Ghostface. No masked teenager asking about scary movies. But imagine being Williamson in that moment. You have just been watching a story about students killed in their own apartments. You are alone. You look across the room. A window is open. And your brain does what every brain does when fear gets inside it. It builds a story. Was it open before? Did I leave it like that? Did the wind move it? Or did someone come in? That last question is the whole bridge between Gainesville and Scream, not the facts. The feeling, the idea that safety can be an illusion, that a house can turn against you in 1 second, that a door, a lock, or a window might be the only thing between normal life and something unthinkable. That is what Scream turned into fiction. So when someone says Scream is based on a true story, the honest answer is, not exactly. Scream is fiction. Ghostface is fiction. Woodsboro is fiction. The phone calls, the mask, the movie trivia, the final reveal, all fiction. But the fear underneath it came from something real. A college town was shaken. 5 students were murdered. Families panicked. Students changed how they slept. A university tried to keep people safe, while nobody knew where the danger would go next. And years later, one screenwriter saw an open window and felt the same question Gainesville had been living with. What if someone is already inside? That is why Scream still works, not because Ghostface was real, because the fear was.